6 months. That's how long it had been since my poker buddy Charlie checked out. Lung cancer took him slow and mean, and I sat with him through the last 3 weeks, playing gin rummy on a tray table while the machines beeped and his wife cried in the hallway. We never talked about the old days. Not once. He just squeezed my hand when I left that final night and said, "You'll know when you need to know, Walt." I didn't ask what he meant. That wasn't our way. So when his boy, Charlie Jr., showed up at my GA Rage on a Tuesday morning with a sealed envelope, I was elbow deep in a transmission pan and not in the mood for surprises. The kid looked rough, like he hadn't slept in a week. Dark circles under his eyes, shirt untucked, hands shaking just enough to make the envelope rattle. "Dad said to give you this," he said. Said open it when the QRY shuts down. I wiped my hands on a red rag and took the envelope. It was heavy, the kind of paper that feels expensive even when it's old and yellowed. My name was written on the front in Charlie's blocky handwriting, the same way he used to my arcade betting slips when we played penny poker at the VFW hall. "The QRY shut down yesterday," Junior said. "They turned off the crushers at 4 in the afternoon. I stood there and watched the last truck roll out empty." I nodded and slid my thumb under the flap. The paper inside was folded twice, crisp as a new dollar or bill despite its age. I pulled it out and read the first line. Then I read it again. Then I sat down on my rolling stool because my knees decided they didn't want to hold me up anymore. It was a partnership agreement, dated 1972, signed by Charlie and notarized by a man named Harold P. Denton, who I remembered as a fat little lawyer with a cigar or habit and a desk full of ashtrays. The terms were plain and brutal. In the event of dissolution, liquidation, or cessation of operations of any entity owned by Charles T. Morrison Sr., the undersigned partner, Walter J. Miller, would assume controlling interest in every rock, gravel, and concrete plant in 3 states. I turned the page. There was a list. 12 facilities, 6 quarries, 4 gravel pits, 2 major concrete batch plants. The names were all familiar, are businesses I'd helped build with my own 2 hands back when we were young and hungry and willing to work 16 hours in the rain. Junior was watching me, his face caught between hope and fear. "What is it? Uncle Walt, is it bad? Did he owe you money?" I folded the paper reefully and tucked it into my shirt pocket. "He didn't owe me a thing, son. He just paid me back for something I forgot I lent him 40 years ago." The GA Rage was quiet except for the drip of oil into a catch pan and the faint buzz of the fluorescent light overhead. I looked around at the tools hanging on the pegboard, the greasy concrete floor, the calendar are from 2004 still stuck on July. This was my world. Small. Simple. Nobody's business but mine. But Charlie had just handed me the keys to a whole different kingdom, and I wasn't sure I wanted to walk through that door. Thing is, I'd been hiding for a long time. Not running from anything. Just hiding. After the war, after the factories, after all the years of dust and dynamite and deals made on handshakes, I'd had enough of the noise. I bought this little GA Rage on the edge of town, fixed CARS for people who couldn't afford the dealership, and let everyone forget I'd ever been anyone worth remembering. Even my daughter, Lisa, didn't know the half of it. She grew up thinking her dad was a mechanic who played cards on Thursday nights and never took a vacation. She never asked about the SCAR on my shoulder or the reason I flinched when trucks backfired. She never wondered why old men in expensive suits would sometimes pull up in UNMA Rked CARS, sit in my office for 10 minutes, and leave without saying goodbye. That I liked it that way. Simple as safe. Simple as quiet. But quiet doesn't last forever, especially when the world decides it's time for you to stand up again. The QRY shutdown was big news in our town. Not because anyone actually read about the rocks, but because it meant jobs were gone and land was up for grabs. The developers had been circling for years, waiting for Charlie to stumble. When he got sick, they smelled blood. When he died, they root repeating their knives. And the loudest knife repeater at the table was my own son-in-law, Dennis. Now, I'm not a man who holds grudges over little things. Dennis is a weasel, but most bank loan officers He married Lisa 15 years ago, told her he'd give her a good life, and then spent every year since then trying to turn her into a status symbol. He bought a house with a porch he never sat on, drove a CA or he couldn't afford, and wore suits that cost more than my first truck. The man had never worked a day of physical labor in his life, but he talked about real estate values and asset portfolios like he'd built the town with his own two hands. Last year, he rooted in on me. Told Lisa I wasn't safe to live alone anymore. Said the GA rage was a Haza RD, that I'd forget to turn off the acetylene torch or drop a transmission on my own head. He had her convinced I needed professional CA which was his polite way of saying, sell the property so we can pocket the money before the highway expansion makes it worth triple. Lisa fought him at first. She's a good girl, always was. But Dennis is patient and persistent, the way Tick's persistent. He wore her down with spreadsheets and statistics, showed her brochures for assisted living facilities that looked more like hotels than nursing homes, and convinced her that selling the GA Rage was the only way to fund my golden Yaris. I let them talk. I let them plan. I even let Dennis walk through my GA Rage once with a Clipbo ARD, measuring SQA footage and making notes about redevelopment potential. He didn't look at the tools or the photos on the wall or the dented coffee mug that said, "World's okayest mechanic." He looked at the real estate and nothing else. That was his mistake. He thought he was dealing with an old man who couldn't see past his own workbench. The day Junior brought me that envelope, I was sitting on my stool, holding a piece of paper that changed everything. But I didn't get angry. I didn't call Lisa or Ma RCH down to the bank to wave the agreement in Dennis's face. I just folded it back up, poured myself a cup of Luque RM coffee from the pot I'd made that morning, and STA root thinking. Charlie and I had a history that went deeper than qua rise and concrete. We met in 1969, both of us fresh out of the service, both of us too stubborn to ask the government for help. We worked construction, hauling bags of cement, and mixing mortar in the hot sun. We saved our money and dreamed about owning something, anything, that would let us work for ourselves instead of for men who yelled at us from air-conditioned trailers. In 1972, Charlie scraped together enough cash to buy his first qua RY. It was a pitiful little operation, one crusher and two trucks, and a shack that leaked when it rained. I put up half the money from my savings, refused to take interest, and worked beside him for 2 years without drawing a full paycheck. He wrote up that ridership agreement as a promise, a symbol of what we'd built together. He kept it in his safe, and I never thought about it again because I never expected him to need it. But Charlie was SMA ruder than me. He saw the future coming, the consolidation, the corporate raiders, the banks that would circle like Shah RKS the moment he showed weakness. He structured his holdings so that no single creditor could ever claim a majority stake, because I was sitting out here with a wrench in my hand, holding the Shah Res that really mattered. He'd been protecting me just as much as he'd been protecting himself. And now the qua RRY had shut down, triggered the clause, and handed me the one thing Dennis never expected I'd have. Power. Real power. The kind that doesn't show up on a credit report. That evening, I locked the GA Rage RLY and drove out to the qua RRY. The gates were chained, but I knew a gap in the fence behind the old scale house. I parked my truck and walked through the weeds to the edge of the pit. The whole place was silent, which felt wrong. That hole in the ground had been ROA ring and grinding and shaking the EARTH for 50 years, and now it just sat there like an old dog that had finally laid down for good. I stood there until the sun went down, thinking about Charlie, remembering the night he wrote that agreement, the way his handwriting got sloppy after the third whiskey. He'd clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Walt, if I ever go down, you're the one who picks up the pieces. You've got the steady hands." I looked at my hands. GNA lead knuckles. Grease under the nails. Steady enough, I guess. Steady enough to hold a wrench. Steady enough to hold a signature. When I got back to the GA Rage, there was a message on my answering machine from Lisa. Her voice was tight and worried, the way it always got when Dennis had been in her EAR. "Dad, Dennis wants to know why Junior was at your shop today. He says there's something weird going on with the qua RRY estate. Can you call me back?" I sat in the DRK and listened to her message 3 times. Then I erased it and went to bed. Let Dennis worry. Let him scheme. Let him think he was dealing with a confused old man who didn't know what day it was. Tomorrow, I'd remind him who I used to be. I woke up before sunrise, the way I always do, and made myself a pot of coffee. The GA Rage was cold, so I lit the space heater, and sat at my workbench with Charlie's agreement spread out in front of me. I studied every word, every clause, every signature and initial. It was airtight. Charlie had paid the filing fees, kept the records updated, never let the business structure change enough to void the original terms. He'd been preparing for this moment for 40 years. That's the thing about old men. We may not move fast, but we plan. We wait. We outlast the loud ones because we know that noise doesn't win rs. Patience does. Preparation does. A folded piece of paper in a sealed envelope does. At 9 in the morning, Junior showed up again. He came in looking even more tired than the day before, and he was carrying a Riboe Road box full of files. I brought everything, he said, setting the box on the floor. The books, the loan documents, the tax filings. The bank is calling in the loans tomorrow, Uncle Walt. My dad's estate is underwater. They're going to take everything. I opened the box and pulled out the top file. A loan agreement from National Trust, dated 2 years ago, signed by Charlie and a loan officer named Dennis P. M.A. Richetti. My son-in-law's signature was right there at the bottom. I smiled a little, just to myself. Not a happy smile, not an angry one. Just a smile of recognition, of understanding that the game had already st root and I was way behind, but catching up fast. Don't worry about the bank, I said. I'll handle them. Junior looked at me with the same hope and fear I'd seen the day before. How? There's no money. My dad was leveraged to the teeth. I tapped the agreement on the workbench. Your dad set up a trust fund 3 months before he died. He moved the core properties into it, the ones that actually produce profit. The creditors, fighting over the empty shell, but the real assets, safe. And they're safe because he named me as the trustee. Junior blinked. He never told me that. He never told me either. I pulled a pencil and a pad of paper from the drawer. But I know your dad, and I know how he thought. He didn't put that trust together by accident. He was paying off his debts, clearing his books, making sure the only thing left for the banks to take was the stuff that didn't matter. ISTA root writing, making a list of names and numbers. The banks, the creditors, the developers. Dennis, here's what's going to happen, I said. I'm going to make some calls. You're going to sit tight and answer your phone. And tomorrow, when the bank sends their man to repossess, we're going to have a little conversation. Junior was young, B.A. Rely 35, and the weight of his father's legacy was crushing him. But he had the same stubborn set to his jaw that Charlie used to have. The same refusal to give up even when the CARDS were all against him. He nodded, stood up, and shook my hand. Thank you, Uncle Walt. Don't thank me yet. We've got a fight ahead of us. I walked him to the door and watched him drive off in his father's old pickup. The sun was climbing high, bright and cold, and I could see dust rising from the Qua RRY road where the last truck had left. I went back inside, picked up the phone, and dialed a number I hadn't called in 20 years. That it rang twice. A gruff voice answered, the kind of voice that had been around too long to be impressed by anything. Yeah. H.A. rolled. It's Walt Miller. Silence on the other end. Then a low whistle. Well, I'll be damned. I thought you'd gone underground for good. I did. But I'm coming back up. Need you to pull some records for me. Old loan files, Pa Reinerships, anything with the names Morrison, National Trust, and my son-in-law Dennis Massachusetts Richetti. H.A. rolled laughed. A rusty sound like a hinge that needed oil. Trouble in Pa Radis, trouble in the Qua RRY. Charlie just made me a very rich man, and certain people going to be very upset about it. I'll have what you need by morning, H.A. rolled said. You sure about this, Walt? Once you open that box, you can't close it again. I looked around my GA rage, at the tools and the dirt and the comfortable mess of a life I'd built. It was small and dirty and perfect, but it wasn't going to last forever, and the people I loved needed more than a mechanic with a bandage thumbed, I'm sure, I said. Time to remind them how the rocks got paid for. I hung up and poured myself another cup of coffee. Outside, a CAR drove past, slowing down for a second before speeding up again. Dennis, probably, doing his morning drive-by to see if my truck was out front yet. I waved through the window, just to let him know I was awake and alert and not going anywhere. He didn't wave back. He never did. The next morning, I woke up with a plan and a headache. The plan was solid. The headache was from drinking too much cheap whiskey the night before, sitting alone in my GA rage and thinking about Charlie. I'd poured 2 glasses, one for me and one for the empty chair across the workbench. We used to do that after long shifts, back when we were young and our backs didn't ache and the world seemed like something we could bend into shape with enough muscle and stubbornness. I finished my coffee and checked my phone. H.A. Rold had sent a message at 2 in the morning, just a single line. Got everything. Come by the office when you're ready. H.A. Rold Denton Jr. had taken over his father's law practice after the old man retired to Florida. He was just as fat and just as smart, but with better suits and fewer cigar or burns on his desk. We'd stayed in touch over the IRS in the way that old soldiers stay in touch, which meant we talked once every 5 IRS and acted like no time had passed at all. I drove across town to his office, a converted storefront on Main Street that still had the original tin ceiling and creaky wooden floors. H.A. Rold was waiting with a stack of folders on his desk and a pot of coffee that smelled like it had been sitting there since dawn. "Walt Miller," he said, shaking my hand. "You look exactly the same. More grease, less hair. Flattery will get you everywhere." I sat down and pointed at the folders. "What do you have?" H.A. Rold opened the top folder and spread out a series of documents. "The trust Charlie set up is legitimate." I checked the filing dates and the signatures. He transferred ownership of the 3 profitable plants to the trust in late February, about 3 months before he died. The loans National Trust issued were against the holding company, not against the individual assets. That means the bank's claim only covers what's left in the holding company, which is about $40,000 RS in equipment and a bunch of accounts payable. What about Dennis? He signed off on those loans. That's the interesting part. H.A. Rold pulled out a SEPA rate file. Dennis, Massachusetts Ricchetti approved a $2 million line of credit to Charlie's company based on collateral that had already been moved. He either knew about the trust and approved the loan anyway, or he didn't bother to check the asset records before signing. Either way, it's a violation of his bank's internal policies. If the State Banking Commission gets wind of this, he's in serious trouble. I leaned back in my chair and let that sink in. Dennis had been so eager to get Charlie's business on his books that he'd skipped the due diligence. He'd seen a struggling company and decided to push it over the edge, probably hoping the foreclosure would make him look like a hero to his bosses. He didn't count on Charlie being one step ahead. "Can we use this?" I asked. "We can use all of it." H.A. Rold tapped the file. "But here's the real question. What do you want to do with the assets you own them now? Controlling interest means you can run them, sell them, or shut them down entirely. You could liquidate everything and walk away with enough money to buy half this town." I thought about that. Thought about the Quarry standing silent in the sun. Thought about the men who'd worked there, the ones I remembered from the old days, the ones who'd come to Charlie's funeral with calloused hands and worn-out boots. They didn't have trust funds or golden parachutes. They had mortgages and kids and the same tired hope that the next shift would be better than the last. "I'm going to keep them running," I said. Charlie didn't build that business to have it torn down for real estate development. He built it to provide jobs and materials and a future for people who didn't have anything else. H.A. Rold nodded like he'd expected that answer. "Then you've got work to do. The bank's foreclosure hearing is scheduled for next Wednesday. You need to show up with the partnership agreement and a plan to assume the debt. I'll file the paperwork to transfer the trust assets back into the operating company on a temporary basis, just long enough to satisfy the creditors." "How much cash do I need?" "About $300,000 to cover the immediate debts. The rest can be restructured." H.A. Rold paused. "Do you have that kind of money sitting around?" I smiled and pulled out my checkbook. "I've been saving for a rainy day. It's been raining pretty hard lately." H.A. Rold looked at the balance I wrote down and raised his eyebrows. "You've been holding out on everyone, haven't you?" "Holding out is what I do best. It's how I survived this long without going crazy." I left H.A. Rold's office with a folder full of documents and a feeling I hadn't experienced in decades. It was close to excitement, that electric buzz that used to hit me when we were negotiating a new contract or preparing to dynamite a particular RLY stubborn rock face. I wasn't a young man anymore, but I still knew how to move pieces on a BOA-RD. The first piece I moved was a call to Dennis's boss, the branch manager of National Trust's regional office. His name was Richard Road Cole, a clean-shaven corporate type who'd never set foot in a Quarry and probably thought gravel came from a factory somewhere. I introduced myself as the new controlling partner of Morrison Industries and asked for a meeting to discuss the outstanding loan. Cole was confused. I'm sorry, I thought Mr. Morrison's estate was in bankruptcy proceedings. Who did you say you were? Walter Miller. I've been in the business for 40 years. Charlie Morrison and I built that company together. I have the paperwork to prove it. I'd suggest you look at the partnership agreement on file with the state before you proceed with any foreclosure action. There was a long pause on the other end. Then Cole said, I'll have my team review the documents. Can you come in this afternoon? I'll be there at 3. I hung up and called Lisa. She answered on the first ring, her voice tight with worry. Dad, what's going on? Dennis says you've been making calls to his bank and threatening people. I haven't threatened anyone. I've asked for a meeting to discuss some business matters. That's all. Business matters since when do you have business matters? Since Charlie died and left me a little more than a poker debt. I kept my voice calm. I'll explain everything when I see you. But Lisa, I need you to trust me on this. I know what I'm doing. She was quiet for a moment. I could hear Dennis in the background, his voice sharp and insistent, trying to get her to hang up. Then she said, Okay, Dad, but please be careful. Dennis is really upset. I'm always careful. I said goodbye and set the phone down. Careful was my middle name, right after Walter and before Miller. I'd spent 68 years learning when to speak and when to stay quiet, when to move and when to wait. Most people thought that was weakness. They thought the quiet ones were the ones who didn't have anything to say. They were wrong. The quiet ones were the ones who knew that words were like explosives. Used wrong, they just made noise. Used right, they moved mountains. That afternoon, I put on my best shirt and drove to the bank. The building was a glass and steel monstrosity that looked out of place against the old brick storefronts of Main Street. I parked in the visitor's lot and walked through the revolving door into the sterile lobby. Everything was beige and chrome and polished to a high shine. Nobody was sweating or swearing or covered in dust. It felt like another world. Richard Cole met me in his corner office on the second floor. He was younger than I expected, maybe 45, with a firm handshake and the kind of smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Dennis was standing by the window, arms crossed, trying to look like he belonged in the room instead of cowering behind his boss. Mr. Miller, thank you for coming in. Cole gestured to a chair. I have to say, I was surprised to hear from you. Our records show that the Morrison estate has no viable assets. The QRY operations have been suspended, and the outstanding debts exceed the collateral value. Your records, incomplete. I pulled the partnership agreement out of my folder and slid it across the desk. This document gives me controlling interest in every entity Charlie Morrison owned. The trust he established before his death covers the majority of the productive assets. The loans you issued were against the holding company, which is essentially empty. Cole picked up the agreement and read it carefully. I watched Dennis's face shift from confidence to confusion to something that looked a lot like fear. He stepped forward to look at the document over Cole's shoulder, then stepped back like he'd been burned. That can't be right, Dennis said. I reviewed the company's financials myself. There was no mention of any partnership agreement. Did you look at the state filings? I asked. The agreement was registered in 1972 and renewed every 10 years. Standard road practice for partnerships with multiple subsidiaries. You would have found it if you checked. Cole looked up at Dennis with an expression that made the younger man wilt. Dennis, did you pull the state partnership records? I assumed they were current. The company was operating as a sole proprietorship in the internal files. You assumed. Cole's voice was flat, dangerous. You approved a $2 million line of credit based on assumptions. I sat back and let the silence do its work. Dennis opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came out. He was trapped and he knew it. Mr. Cole, I'm not here to cause trouble, I said. I want to restructure the debt and keep the operations running. The QRY is a going concern. It's been producing for half a century. With the right management and a little breathing room, it can be profitable again. I'm willing to assume responsibility for the loans and work out a repayment schedule that satisfies the bank's requirements. Cole studied me for a long moment. You're not asking for forgiveness. You're asking for a chance. That's exactly what I'm asking for. He nodded slowly. I'll need to review the full trust documents and have our legal team verify the power ownership status. But if everything checks out, I don't see why we can't negotiate a new agreement. The bank isn't in the business of shutting down viable businesses. We're in the business of making money, and I'd rather make it from a paying customer than from a fire sale. Dennis made a strangled sound. Richard, you can't be serious. This is a bad risk. The QRRY is old, the equipment is outdated, and the market is declining. The market is declining because the previous owner was too sick to run the business and his son was too inexperienced to step in. I looked directly at Dennis. I've been running things since before you were born. I know every inch of that operation, every piece of equipment, every customer, every supplier. I can turn this around in 6 months. Cole leaned four-way road. 6 months, 6 months. Give me a chance to demonstrate, and I'll make the payments. If I don't, you can take it all back and I won't fight you. But let me try first. He extended his hand. You've got 60 days to show me a plan. If I don't see progress by then, we're pulling the plug. I shook his hand and stood up. You'll see progress by next week. On my way out, Dennis followed me into the hallway. His face was pale and his voice was shaking. This isn't over, Walt. You think you can just waltz in here and take over? I've been working on this foreclosure for months. You're messing with my CA rear. Your CA rear was built on a house of CARDS, Dennis. You pushed Charlie when he was down, and now you're reaping what you sowed. If I were you, I'd START looking for another job. Your boss is going to be checking your work a lot more CA-refully from now on. He grabbed my ARM. You can't do this. Lisa will never forgive you. I stopped and looked at him. Really looked, the way I used to look at men who owed me money or didn't want to pay their workers. Dennis was a bully, but bullies don't last when the guy in front of them doesn't flinch. I'm not doing this for Lisa, I said. I'm doing this for Charlie. And for everyone else you were about to put out of work. Now take your hand off me before I show you how a 68-year-old man with a bad knee can still fold you in half. He let go and stepped back. I walked out of the bank without looking over my shoulder. The afternoon sun was warm on my face, and for the first time in months, I felt like I was breathing properly. I drove straight to the QRRY. The gates were still chained, but I had keys now, copies that Junior had given me the day before. I unlocked the padlock and pulled the chain aside, then drove my truck through the entrance and down the long gravel road to the main office. The building was dark and cold, but the phone still worked. I called Junior and told him to get his crew together. I called the equipment supplier and told him we were coming out of hibernation. I called the old foreman, a man named Pete who'd worked for Charlie for 30 years, and asked him to come back for one more tour. But by the time I got home that night, I had a plan and a team and a fire in my belly that hadn't burned this hot in a long time. Lisa was waiting for me on the porch of my little house behind the GA Rage. She had a cup of coffee in her hands and a look on her face that told me Dennis had already been on the phone, spinning his version of the story. Dad, what happened today? Dennis is furious. He says you threatened him and made him look bad in front of his boss. I didn't threaten anyone. I told the truth. I sat down next to her on the steps. Charlie left me his business. Dennis made a mistake on the loan documents. The bank is going to work with me to keep the QRRY running. That's the whole story. She read at me. You're a mechanic. How can you run a QRRY? Because I was running QRRYs before I was a mechanic. I just decided to take a break for a while. Lisa didn't say anything for a long time. She sipped her coffee and watched the streetlights flicker on, one by one. Then she said, Dennis told me you were ruining his CA rear. He said if you push this, he'll lose his job. Then he shouldn't have done a sloppy job. Loan officers supposed to check their paperwork. He didn't, and now he's paying the price. But he's my husband, Dad. And your son-in-law. Doesn't family mean anything? I reached over and took her hand. It means everything. That's why I'm doing this. Dennis doesn't CA about family. He CA residential about money and status and looking important. He's been trying to push me into a nursing home so he could sell this property and pocket the proceeds. He's been using you as a tool to get what he wants. And that's not something I can let slide. Lisa's eyes filled with tears. I didn't want to believe it. I thought he was looking out for you. He was looking out for himself. But you're a SMART girl. You've always been SMART. You just wanted to believe the best in him. She wiped her eyes and nodded. What happens now? Now I get the QRRY back to work. I save some jobs, pay off some debts, and make sure Charlie's legacy doesn't end up in a dumpster. And you get to decide what you want to do about Dennis. I don't know what I want to do. You've got time to figure it out. I squeezed her hand. Time is the only thing we've got plenty of this late in the game. We sat on the porch for another hour, not talking much, just watching the night settle in. I thought about Charlie and all the nights we'd spent in Simila, our silence. Two old friends who didn't need words to know what the other was thinking. He'd given me a gift, whether he knew it or not. Not the money or the power or the control. He'd given me a reason to stand up again. A reason to be more than just the old mechanic in the greasy coveralls. And I was going to make sure it counted. The first week of reopening the QRRY was a mess. A beautiful, glorious, noisy mess that made my EARS ring and my knees ache and my HRT feel like it had a purpose again. Pete showed up at 6 in the morning on Monday, just like he used to, with his thermos of black coffee and a pack of cigarettes tucked into his shirt pocket. He was 72 now, with a bad hip and a worse attitude, but his eyes lit up when he saw the crusher fire up for the first time in 3 months. Thought I'd never hear that sound again, he said, shouting over the ROA of machinery. Charlie always said you'd come back when the time was right. Guess he knew what he was talking about. I handed him a hot RD hat and a clip-away road. You're foreman again. Same pay as before. Same hours. Same complaining about the coffee. Wouldn't have it any other way. He put on the hot RD hat and walked Tawa RD the pit, yelling instructions at the younger guys who'd showed up looking for work. Most of them were Charlie's former employees, men in their 30s and 40s with families to feed and mortgages to pay. They'd been scrambling for odd jobs since the shutdown, doing landscaping, painting houses, whatever they could find. When Junior called them and said the QRRY was coming back to life, they dropped everything and came running. I watched them work and felt something loosen in my chest. This was what Charlie and I had built, not just a business but a community, a place where men could earn a living and take pride in what they did with their hands. The developers and the bankers and the dentist types of the world didn't understand that. They saw numbers on spreadsheets. They didn't see the sweat and the dust and the quiet satisfaction of a job done right. But I saw it. And I was going to make sure it kept happening. The bank's legal team verified the partnership agreement within 3 days. Richard Rodcole called me personally to confirm that the restructuring was approved. He also told me that Dennis had been placed on administrative leave pending an internal review of his loan approval practices. The tone of his voice suggested that Dennis's future at National Trust was not bright. I didn't gloat. I just said thank you and got back to work. The second week, the orders STA route coming in. Old customers who'd switched to other suppliers during the shutdown came back when they heard the QRRY was running again. They remembered Charlie's quality and his reliable delivery. They also remembered me, though most of them hadn't seen me in YARS. You're the guy who used to drive the big truck, one contractor said, squinting at me through the dust. The one with the big mustache and the loud laugh. That was a long time ago, I said. You haven't changed much. Older, sure. But you still got that look in your eye. I didn't ask what look he meant. I already knew. By the third week, the QRRY was operating at full capacity. Pete had the crew running like clockwork, and Junior was handling the office side of things with surprising competence. The kid had been overwhelmed when his father died, but he was learning fast, asking the right questions and making the right decisions. Charlie would have been proud. I was at the QRRY every day, not because I needed to be, but because I wanted to be. The noise and the grime and the physical labor felt like coming home. I still kept my GA rage, still went back in the evenings to clean up and answer the phone and pretend I was just a mechanic who happened to own a few rock plants on the side, but the secret was out. The town newspaper ran a story about the QRRY reopening, with a photo of me standing next to the crusher, looking like I'd just been dug out of a coal mine. The headline said, "Local mechanic revives failing QRRY." They mentioned the partnership agreement, the trust, the bank restructuring. They didn't mention Dennis, but everyone in town knew the story anyway. The reaction was mostly positive. People stopped me on the street to shake my hand and tell me they were glad the jobs were coming back. The diner owner gave me free coffee. The HRDWA restore gave me a discount on a new set of tools. Little things, but they added up to something I hadn't felt in a long time. Respect. The kind you earn. Not the kind you buy. But not everyone was happy. Dennis made sure of that. He sta route showing up at the Qua RRY, parking his CAR at the gate and watching the trucks roll in and out. He never said anything, never got out of the CAR. He just sat there, fuming, like a dog watching someone else eat his dinner. I ignored him at first, figured he'd get bored and go away. But he kept coming, day after day, and eventually I had to deal with it. One afternoon, I walked up to his CAR and tapped on the window. He rolled it down a few inches, just enough to show his red-rimmed eyes and unshaven jaw. "You need something, Dennis. I need you to stop. That's what I need." His voice was raw, desperate. "I lost my job. Lisa won't talk to me. My mother-in-law called me a parazit. I've got nothing left. You had a job and a wife and a chance to be a decent human being. You lost all of that because of your own choices. Not mine." He slammed his hand against the steering wheel. "You had this plan from the START, didn't you? Charlie told you everything. You set me up." I leaned down so I was eye level with him. "Listen to me, CA Refully. Charlie and I made that agreement 40 years ago. He never told me about the trust. He never told me about the timing. He just left me a piece of paper in an envelope and told me to open it when the Qua ROI shut down. I didn't plan anything. I just showed up in STA route cleaning up the mess you made." Dennis shook his head. "You think that makes you better than me? You're just an old man who got lucky." Luck had nothing to do with it. I worked my ass off for that Parinership. I put my own money and my own sweat into Charlie's business when he didn't have anything. I built that Qua ROI with my hands. You sat in an air-conditioned office and pushed papers. That's the difference between us. He didn't have an answer for that. He just STA read at me with a look that was half hatred and half misery. I straightened up and stepped back from the CAR. "Go home, Dennis. Get your life together. Find a job that doesn't involve ruining other people's families. And leave Lisa alone until she decides what she wants to do. If you push her, you'll lose her for good. You're not my father. You don't get to tell me what to do. No, I'm not your father. But I am the man who's going to keep running this Qua RRY whether you like it or not. So take your CAR and your attitude somewhere else. You're not welcome here." He didn't leave right away. He sat in that CAR for another 20 minutes, engine running, eyes fixed on the Qua RRY gates. I went back to work and let him stew. Eventually, he drove off, tires spinning on the gravel, leaving a cloud of dust behind him that I watched him go and felt a twinge of something that might have been pity. He'd had everything and thrown it away because he couldn't see past his own ambition. That was his tragedy, not mine. The fourth week brought more good news. The trust assets were fully integrated into the operating company, and the balance sheets were STA rooting to look healthy again. We landed a major contract with the county for road repair materials, enough to keep the crusher running at capacity for the next 6 months. Junior negotiated the deal himself, and he did a damn good job. Your dad would have been proud. I told him, clapping him on the back, that he smiled. But there was sadness in his eyes. I wish he could see this. He worked so hard to keep everything together. He never got to see the payoff. Sometimes that's how it works. You plant trees you'll never sit under. But the important thing is that you planted them for the right reasons. Your dad did that. Now it's our turn to keep them growing. Junior nodded and went back to his paperwork. I watched him for a moment, remembering Charlie at the same age, same stubborn set to his shoulders, same way of squinting at a contract like it owed him money. The apple didn't fall far from the tree that evening. I drove out to the cemetery to visit Charlie's grave. I hadn't been there since the funeral, and the place looked different in the summer twilight. The grass was green and the headstones were clean, and the whole world felt quieter than it had any right to be. I sat down on the bench next to his grave and pulled out a flask of whiskey. I took a sip and poured the rest onto the ground. "You did good, old friend. The business is back on its feet. Your boy is shaping up. The bank is off our backs. And Dennis is out of the picture." I paused, watching the whiskey soak into the EARTH. "I know you didn't plan all of this. You couldn't have. But you gave me the tools to fix it, and that's more than most people ever get. So thank you." The wind blew through the trees and made the leaves rustle. I thought about all the RS we'd spent together, the laughter and the fights and the long nights when neither of us had anything to say, but neither of us wanted to leave. That was friendship. That was family. I stood up and brushed off my pants. "I'll take CA Re of your son. I'll take CA Re of the Qua RRY. And I'll make sure your name stays on that sign for as long as the rocks keep coming out of the ground. That's a promise." I walked back to my truck and drove home. The GA rage was RK and quiet, but Lisa's CA was in the driveway. She'd been staying at the house more often lately, using the bedroom and helping me with the books. She'd stopped talking about Dennis altogether, which I took as a good sign. I found her in the kitchen, making a sandwich. She looked up when I walked in and smiled. Long day, she asked. Long and good. We landed the county contract. Junior handled the negotiations. Dad, that's wonderful. She put down the knife and came over to hug me. I'm so proud of what you're doing. I know Mom would have been, too. My wife had been gone for 12 years, but I still thought about her every day. She'd been the one who convinced me to buy the GA Rage, to slow down and enjoy life instead of fighting every battle that came along. She died before I could tell her that I'd taken her advice and turned it into a peaceful, quiet existence. But peace and quiet were over now, and that was okay. I'd had my rest. Now it was time to work again. Your mom would have told me to stop acting like a fool and retire, I said. But she also would have told me to do the right thing. So I'm doing the right thing. Lisa laughed and went back to her sandwich. Speaking of the right thing, I got a call from Dennis today. He wants to talk. He says he's going to counseling and he wants to fix things. What do you want? She paused, bread in hand. I don't know. I still love him, or at least I still love the person I thought he was. But I don't trust him anymore. And you can't have a mariage without trust. Take your time. There's no rush. He can wait. She nodded and finished making her sandwich. I poured myself a glass of water and sat down at the kitchen table, watching the last light fade outside the window. The RY was running, the family was healing, and the future was a little less uncertain than it had been a month ago, but that was enough for now. But I knew, deep down, that the biggest fight was still ahead. Dennis wasn't the type to give up quietly. He'd been humiliated, stripped of his job and his status and his comfortable life. He'd find a way to strike back, and when he did, I'd need to be ready. I always was. The call came at 2 in the morning. I was dead asleep, dreaming about Charlie and a hand of poker that never seemed to end, when my phone root buzzing on the nightstand. I fumbled for it, knocked over a glass of water, and finally got it to my Mr. Miller. The voice was young, panicked. This is Danny, the night watchman at the RY. You need to get out here. Someone's been messing with the equipment. I was out of bed before he finished the sentence. Tell me exactly what you saw. Trucks, a couple of them, pulled up around midnight. I thought it was a delivery at first, but they didn't have any markings. They drove to the main RD and STA route spraying something on the crusher. I tried to get closer, but they saw me and took off. I called the sheriff, but I wanted you to know. Don't touch anything. I'll be there in 15 minutes. I pulled on my jeans and boots, grabbed my keys, and drove through the empty streets with my headlights off. The last thing I needed was to announce my arrival to whoever might still be lurking around the property. The RY was RK and silent when I got there, but I could see Danny's flashlight bobbing in the crusher. I parked behind the office and walked over to him. Keeping my steps quiet on the graveled, "They're gone," he said, pointing at the equipment. But look, I shined my own light on the crusher and felt my stomach drop. The exposed metal surfaces were covered in a RK, sticky liquid that glistened in the beam. I leaned in and smelled it. Diesel fuel. They'd doused the main BEA rings and the hydraulic lines with enough diesel to cause a major fire if anyone had STA root the engine. Sabotage, I said. Someone wanted to burn this place down. Danny was shaking. Who would do something like this? The RY's been running fine. We're hiring people again. Nobody's got a reason to hurt us. I didn't answer him right away. I walked around the equipment, checking the other machines. They'd hit the crusher, the conveyor belt, and the main generator. All critical components, all soaked in diesel. If the night shift had STA root up without noticing, the whole RD could have gone up in flames. Call the sheriff back and tell them I need a forensic team, I said. And don't let anyone else in or this equipment until the cops have taken samples. Danny nodded and pulled out his phone. I walked back to my truck and sat down in the driver's seat, my hands gripping the steering wheel RD enough to turn my knuckles white. I knew who did this. I didn't have proof, not yet, but I knew. Dennis had been quiet for too long, biding his time, nursing his grudge. The counseling sessions and the apologies were just window dressing. He'd been waiting for the right moment to strike, and he'd picked the most dangerous way possible. Sabotage wasn't a misdemeanor. It was a felony. If I caught him, he'd go to prison. I wasn't sure if that made me happy or sad that the sheriff's department arrived within the hour. A young deputy named Fields who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else at 2 in the morning. He took my statement and Danny's statement, photographed the equipment, and collected samples of the diesel. "You got any enemies, Mr. Miller?" he asked, not looking up from his notepad. "A few. But I think I know which one is behind this." He gave me a long, steady look. "You need to let us handle the investigation. Don't go doing anything stupid." "I'm too old for stupid. But I'm not too old to protect what's mine." The deputy wrote something down and moved on to the next question. I answered mechanically, my mind already working through the possibilities. Dennis wasn't smart enough to plan something like this alone. He would have needed help, someone with access to the QRY, someone who knew the layout and the security schedule. That meant he'd recruited someone from the inside. The thought made my blood run cold. I'd trusted Pete with the crew, trusted Junior with the office. But there were other workers, men who'd been hired in the last few weeks, men I didn't know as well as the old-timers. One of them might have been vulnerable to Dennis's promises or threats. That I made a list in my head of everyone who'd joined the crew since the reopening. 7 names. All of them local, all of them desperate for work. Any one of them could have been turned. But I needed proof. And to get proof, I needed to talk to Dennis. I didn't go home after the police left. I drove straight to Dennis's apartment, a sad little place on the wrong side of town where he'd been living since Lisa asked him to move out. The lights were off, and his car was in the parking lot. I sat in my truck for a few minutes, watching the building, waiting to see if anyone moved behind the curtains. Nothing. Just silence and darkness and the faint hum of the streetlights. I got out and knocked on his door. No answer. I knocked harder. "Dennis, I know you're in there. Open the door." Still nothing. I was about to leave when I heard a faint sound from inside, like someone trying to be quiet and failing. I pressed my ear against the wood and listened. Footsteps, soft and hurried. Then a window sliding open. I ran around the side of the building just in time to see a figure drop from the second-story window and land in the bushes. He scrambled to his feet and rude running. But he was clumsy and out of shape, and I caught him before he made it to the street. "Let go of me," Dennis shouted, thrashing against my grip. "You can't do this. I'll call the cops." "You already called them, Dennis. They're the ones I want to talk to about the diesel you sprayed on my equipment." I held him by the collar of his cheap jacket, breathing hard. "I should have known you wouldn't be able to let it go." "I don't know what you're talking about. I was sleeping. You broke into my apartment. Your apartment has a fire escape, Dennis. You didn't have to jump out the window unless you were trying to escape something." I pulled him closer. "What did you do with your accomplice?" "Who helped you?" He tried to pull away, but I was stronger than I looked and angrier than I'd been in a long time. "I didn't help anyone. I don't know anything. You're going to regret this, Walt. You're going to regret everything." I didn't hit him. I wanted to. God knows I wanted to. But I'd been in enough scrapes in my younger years to know that violence only made things worse. I pulled out my phone and called Deputy Fields. "I've got someone you need to talk to," I said. "Meet me at the apartment on Cherry Street." Dennis spent the rest of the night in a holding cell. I didn't sleep either. I went back to the QRY and stayed there, watching the sunrise over the silent machinery, thinking about what came next. The forensic team found traces of Dennis's fingerprints on the diesel containers, along with another set that matched one of the new hires, a kid named Miller who'd been working the night shift for 3 weeks. He confessed as soon as the deputies picked him up, crying and apologizing and saying Dennis had promised him $500 to help with a prank. A prank. Almost burning down $1 million worth of equipment was a prank. The kid was young and stupid, and I didn't have it in my heart to hate him. But I had plenty of hatred left for Dennis. He was charged with felony vandalism and conspiracy to commit arson. The bond was set high, and he couldn't make it. He sat in jail for 2 weeks before his family scraped together enough for a lawyer, and even then, he didn't get released until the preliminary hearing. Lisa came to me the night before the hearing. She looked tired and sad and older than her years. "Dad, what's going to happen to Dennis? That's up to the court." She sat down on the couch, pulling her knees up to her chest. "He called me from jail. He said he was sorry. He said he was just trying to get your attention, to make you stop. He didn't mean to hurt anyone. He sprayed diesel fuel all over expensive equipment. If that fire had STA root, people could have died. There's no excuse for that. I know. She wiped her eyes. But he's still my husband. I can't just stop CA ring about him. I sat down next to her. I understand that. I'm not asking you to stop CA ring. I'm asking you to be honest with yourself about who he really is. Not who you want him to be. Not who he says he is. Who he actually is. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I think I've known for a while. I just didn't want to admit it. That's the hardest part, admitting that someone you love isn't the person you thought they were. But once you admit it, you can start moving four-way road. Lisa nodded and rested her head on my shoulder. We sat like that for a while, not talking, just being together. I thought about her mother, about the way she used to comfort Lisa when she was a little girl, the way she'd hold her and tell her everything was going to be okay. I couldn't promise that everything was going to be okay, but I could promise that I'd be there for her, no matter what. The preliminary ring was quick and ugly. Dennis's lawyer argued for leniency, painting him as a desperate man who'd made a mistake under pressure. The prosecutor wasn't having it. She presented the forensic evidence, the confession from the accomplice, the timeline of events. She even brought in a witness who'd seen Dennis buying diesel fuel at a gas station the day before the sabotage. The judge set a trial date for 3 months out. Dennis was released on his own recognizance with strict conditions, including a no-contact order with me and the QRRY. He didn't look at me when he left the courtroom. He didn't look at Lisa either. He just walked out with his head down, shoulders hunched. Defeated, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sorrow. I'd won, but winning didn't feel as good as I'd expected. Maybe because the cost had been higher than I wanted to admit. A marriage destroyed. A family broken. A young man's future ruined by his own choices. But I couldn't let myself dwell on that. There were jobs to protect, and people to lead, and a legacy to honor. Charlie's legacy. My legacy. The legacy of everyone who'd ever worked in that QRRY and taken pride in what they'd built. I went back to work the next day and threw myself into the chaos of running a business. The sabotage had set us back a few weeks, but the crew rallied. Pete worked double shifts. Junior handled the insurance claims. The county contract was delayed, but we made it up with other orders. And slowly, steadily, the QRRY st route to feel like itself again. The ROAR of the crusher, the rumble of the trucks, the shouts of the workers. It was music to my EARS. The best music I'd ever heard. Lisa sta route coming to the QRRY with me some days. Helping Junior in the office, Leah running the business from the ground up. She was good at it, RP, and quick and no nonsense. I could see her mother in her. The same quiet strength that had kept me going through all the HRDERS. You're a natural, I told her one afternoon, watching her reconcile a stack of invoices. You think so, I know so. You've got the head for it. She smiled, a real smile, the kind I hadn't seen since before all the trouble sta route. Maybe I'll take over when you retire. Don't rush me. I've still got a few good years left in me. We both laughed, and for a moment, everything felt right. The QRRY was running. The family was healing. The future was uncertain, but it was ours to shape. And that was more than enough. The trial came and went like a summer storm, quick and brutal, and leaving wreckage in its wake. Dennis was convicted on 2 felony counts, and the judge gave him 3 years in state prison. He stood there in his orange jumpsuit, pale and hollow-eyed, while the bailiff led him away. Lisa watched from the front row, her face expressionless, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't cry. She didn't look away. She just sat there like a statue until it was over, and then she walked out of the courtroom without saying a word. I followed her outside. The sun was bright and the air was warm, but she was shivering like it was the middle of winter. You okay? I asked. No, she said. But I will be. That was the moment I knew she'd be fine. She'd taken the hardest hit, and she was still standing, still breathing, still moving four-way road. That kind of strength didn't come from nowhere. It came from her mother, from the years of watching me work and struggle and never give up. It came from being a miller that we drove home in silence. When we got to the house, she went straight to her room and closed the door. I sat on the porch and watched the sun go down, thinking about all the turns my life had taken in the last 6 months. A dead friend, a secret agreement, a family crisis, a criminal trial. It was more drama than I'd had in the previous 30 years combined. But it was over now. Or at least the worst of it was over. The next morning, I went back to the QRRY. The crew was waiting for me, gathered around the main office like they'd called a meeting without me. Pete stepped forward and handed me something wrapped in an oily rag. "What's this? Open it," he said. "It's from all of us." I unwrapped the rag and found a bronze plaque inside. It was engraved with the words Miller Morrison QRRY and the date we'd restart operations. Underneath was a list of every worker's name, from Pete down to the newest hire. "Your name goes at the top," Pete said. UEA rented it. I held the plaque in my hands and felt the weight of it, not just the bronze but everything it represented. These men had trusted me to lead them, had worked beside me through the sabotage and the uncertainty and the fear. They'd given me their loyalty and their sweat and their hope. And now they were giving me this stuff. "Thank you," I said, my voice rougher than I intended. "This means more than you know." I hung the plaque on the wall of the office, right next to Charlie's old photo. The two of them looked down at me, one in silver and one in bronze, both of them reminding me of what we'd built and what we'd lost and what we'd rebuilt together. Junior came in later that afternoon, looking nervous. "Uncle Walt, I need to talk to you about something." "Shoot." "I've been thinking about the future. About what happens to this place when you're not around anymore." He paused, fidgeting with his keys. "I want to Leah R and everything, not just the office stuff. I want to know how to run the crusher, how to negotiate the contracts, how to handle the employees. I want to be ready when the time comes." I leaned back in my chair and studied him. He had his father's earnestness, the same way of looking at you like he was absorbing every word you said. But he also had something new, something that Charlie had taken decades to develop. Confidence. The quiet kind, the kind that didn't need to shout to be heard. "You're already ready," I said. "But if you want to Leah RN more, I'll teach you everything I know. It'll take a while, though. I've got a lot of bad habits to pass on." He laughed, and the tension in the room broke. "I've got time. We both do." I spent the next few months teaching Junior the ins and outs of the business. We went over contracts, suppliers, delivery schedules, maintenance logs. I showed him how to talk to the workers, how to handle complaints, how to spot trouble before it became a problem. He was a quick learner, and he had his father's instinct for when to push and when to pull back. Lisa got more involved too. She took over the bookkeeping and payroll, and she was better at it than anyone I'd ever hired. She set up a new filing system that actually made sense, and she caught a few billing errors that had been costing us money for years. "You're wasted as a mechanic's daughter," I told her one evening. "You should be running a Fortune 500 company." "I'm happy here," she said. "I'm happy being useful. I'm happy being part of something that matters." That was all I needed to hear. She'd found her place, just like Junior had found his. And I'd found mine, right there in the middle of all the dust and the noise and the hard work. The town sta route to change too. The QRRY success brought new business to Main Street. The diner was crowded again at lunchtime. The HRDWA store sold more equipment. The local school got a donation from the QRRY to upgrade its sports facilities. Nothing flashy, just steady, solid contributions from a business that CA read about its community. The newspaper ran another story about the QRRY, this time focusing on the jobs it had created and the families it had supported. They interviewed Pete, who talked about the old days with Charlie. They interviewed Junior, who talked about the future. They even interviewed Lisa, who talked about the importance of second chances. I didn't give an interview. That wasn't my style. But I read the article at the diner over breakfast, and I felt a swell of pride that I couldn't quite put into words. The developers who'd been circling the QRRY property route to drift away. They saw that we weren't going to sell, that we were in it for the long haul. The land wasn't going to become a strip mall or a housing development or a corporate park. It was going to stay what it had always been, a QRRY, a place where real work happened and real people rented a real living. The county contract was renewed. The state bid was approved. The trucks kept rolling and the crusher kept grinding and the money kept coming in. Not fast, not flashy, but steady, reliable. The way Charlie and I had always run things. To one afternoon, I was out at the pit, watching the loader SCP up gravel, when Pete walked over and stood beside me. "You ever think about what you're going to do when you finally hang it up?" he asked. "Not really. Figured I'd just keep showing up until I drop." That's what I used to say, but I've been thinking lately. Maybe there's something to be said for slowing down, enjoying the ride. I looked at him sideways. You're not planning on retiring, are you? He grinned, a gap-toothed grin that made him look 20 years younger. Not yet, but I'm STA rooting to see the appeal. My grandkids are getting big. They want to go fishing. They want me to teach them how to fix things. I've been missing out on that. I nodded slowly. You should take the time. UVA renetted. Maybe, but I wanted to ask you something first. If I do decide to step back, you think Junior could take over my spot? He's got the touch. He reminds me of his old man. He reminds me of both of you, I said. And yes, he can handle it. He's been Leah reneging from the best. Pete clapped me on the shoulder. Good. That's good. I'll stick around for another year or two, just to make sure he's got it down. But after that, I'm going to find a lake and a fishing pole and a cold beer. We stood there in companionable silence, watching the loader work. The sun was warm and the dust was thick and the noise was loud. It was perfect. That night, I went back to the cemetery to visit Charolai. I brought a 6-pack of cheap beer and a couple of plastic cups. I sat on the bench and opened 2 cans and poured one onto the ground. Pete's talking about retiring, I said. Junior's ready to take over. Lisa's got the books in order. The QRRY's making money. Everything's going the way we always wanted. I took a long swallow from my can and let the silence stretch out. You'd be proud, Charolai. I know I am. The wind rustled through the trees, and for just a second, I could have sworn I heard his voice in my ear. Told you, Walt. You were always the steady one. I laughed out loud, STA rightling a crow that had been perched on a NEARBY headstone. Steady as a rock, Charolai. Steady as a rock. I finished my beer and drove home. The GA rage was dark, but the house was lit up. Lisa and Junior were inside, playing CARDS at the kitchen table. They'd spread out a deck of beat-up old playing CARDS and were arguing about whose turn it was to shuffle. You two look like you're having fun, I said, hanging up my jacket. Dad, come play with us. We need a third for poker. I looked at the CARDS, at the faces of my family, and felt something settle deep in my chest. Peace. The kind I'd been chasing for decades, the kind I'd thought I'd never find again after my wife died. I haven't played since Charolai passed, I said. Then it's time to START again. Lisa shuffled the deck and dealt me a hand. What's the stakes? 50 cents per hand. Winner takes all. We played for 2 hours, laughing and arguing and occasionally cheating. I lost $3 RS and didn't see a re. The company was better than the money. When Junior left, Lisa helped me clean up the table. She paused, holding a stack of CARDS, and looked at me with the same serious expression she used to have as a little girl when she was about to ask a tough question. Dad, do you ever miss it the way things used to be? Which way? The way before Dennis, the way before Charolai died, the way before I bought the GA Rage, all of it. I guess I just want to know if you're happy. I thought about it for a minute. Happy was a complicated word. There were days I woke up with more aches than I used to have, and days I felt the weight of everything I'd lost. But there were also days like this one, days when I could look around and see the life I'd built and the people who mattered and the work that gave it meaning. Happy enough, I said. I think that's the best anyone can ask for. She hugged me tight, the way she used to when she was little. I hugged her back and felt the RS melt away. Thanks, Dad. For everything. Anytime, Lisa. Anytime. The weeks turned into months and the months turned into a year. The QRRY kept running. The family kept healing. And I kept showing up, day after day, doing what I'd always done. Working hard, staying steady, keeping my word. Dennis was still in prison, but Lisa had stopped talking about him. She'd filed for divorce and moved on with her life. She was dating a nice guy from the county planning office, someone who didn't have a hidden agenda and didn't try to manipulate her. I approved, not that she needed my approval. Junior got ma ride to a woman from the next town over. The wedding was small and simple, held in the QRRYRD with the Crusher as a backdrop. Charolai's widow cried happy TRS, and I stood next to her and offered her my handkerchief. He would have loved this, she said. Watching the young couple exchange vows. He's here, I said. He's always here. After the ceremony, I walked over to the edge of the pit and looked out at the acres of rock and gravel and dust. It was ugly and beautiful and brutal and wonderful. It was everything Charolai and I had ever wanted. I pulled out my wallet and found the faded copy of the partnership agreement I'd been saying since the day Junior brought it to my GA Rage. I read it one more time, the words blurring slightly in the evening light. 40 YRS, I said out loud. 40 YRS, and it all came down to this. I folded the paper and tucked it back in my wallet. Then I walked back to the Pa Rudy, where my family and my friends were waiting for me. That the QRY was quiet for once. The machine's silent, and the workers gone home. But the silence wasn't empty. It was full, heavy with all the history and hope and stubbornness that had built this place and kept it running. I sat down at the edge of the pit and dangled my legs over the side. The rocks below were dark and ancient, the same rocks that had been there since before I was born and would be there long after I was gone. That was the thing about rocks. They stayed. They endured. They outlasted everything that I had a feeling I'd be staying too. Right here, in this place, with these people. Just like Charlie and I had always planned.